All right, so we can go ahead and get started. We are very pleased to welcome you all to ecoAmerica's webinar on our latest research, How Faith Communities Fuel Social Movements, Lessons for Climate Advocacy. We'll go ahead and start recording the call now, and the recording will be available online following the call today. All right, so my name is Annie Cruz. I'm the director of Blessed Tomorrow, which is the faith engagement program here at ecoAmerica. And we're really looking forward to digging into this comprehensive research. It's bringing forward successful strategies and tactics of some of the most notable social movements of our day, including the immigration movement, Black Lives Matter, and the President Trump election campaign. And we're going to be looking at how faith communities have fueled progress in these efforts and potentially some lessons that we can apply for more effective climate advocacy. And we want to start by noting that, again, ecoAmerica is not one of the leaders of these movements per se, but due to their profound impact on America today, we chose them as case studies. Next slide. Great. So we have a great team of speakers here today to help us walk through this project. Joining me from ecoAmerica, we have our executive director, Megan Spicer. We have our marketing and research manager, Natalie Kobayashi. And we are honored to have a guest speaker today, Alaide Vilchis Ibarra from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. She actually wears two hats. So she's the network organizer for the AMMPARO Program at ELCA. She's also the executive director for the Oregon Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice. She's been working on immigration rights at the local, state, national, and international levels for a decade. And she's a former dreamer herself and recently became a citizen just 4 years ago. And we're certainly honored to have her join us today. So we look forward to hearing about her story of faith leadership in the sanctuary movement when we get to that during the program. Next slide. All right, so just wanted to cover a little bit about today's webinar and the agenda. So we're going to start with a brief overview of who we are, if you're not familiar with us at ecoAmerica. Then we're excited to share with you those 8 lessons for advocacy, and Natalie's going to do that for us. These were developed in partnership with our many contributors and experts from within these movements. And following that, Alaide will share her story and achievements in the new sanctuary movement, especially ELCA's watershed policy that transformed their entire denomination all across the country into a place of refuge and sanctuary. So we're really looking forward to her talk. And there will be time for Q&A at the end. I just want to remind you, all lines are muted, but you can submit questions anytime throughout the call in the chat question function. So please remember to do that. Again, at any time you can ask those questions, chat them to us. We're going to be reviewing them here, and we'll pose those to the presenters during the Q&A session. Great, so I'm going to turn it over to Natalie, who will walk us through the rest of the agenda here. Thanks, Natalie.
Great, thank you, Annie. Briefly, I'd like to explain a bit of background about ecoAmerica and Blessed Tomorrow. ecoAmerica works to build capacity and institutional leadership for climate solutions in the United States. So we support the work and hope to inform all that you're doing. We do that by working in 3 distinct sectors: the faith, health, and local communities, and have a range of national partners who are working on building their visible national leadership, stakeholder engagement, climate advocacy, and action at a local level. All of our recommendations come through deep research, including this report. So for over 10 years, ecoAmerica has been measuring what works with Americans through communications research, message testing, polling, psychographic values, and thematic reporting. In fact, this is the 3rd time we've taken a look at what we can learn from other social campaigns to pull out learnings for advocacy on climate solutions. This year, we've narrowed in on the faith community, which were ubiquitous in all 3 movements. This study provides an objective analysis of the tactics, moral foundations, and messaging of visible social movements, specifically new sanctuary or immigrant rights, Black Lives Matter, and the 2016 election of President Trump, and how involvement of faith communities and leaders of faith have helped forward progress on each. Leaders from within each movement and academic experts were invited to weigh in on report content. Together, we develop learnings and lessons from these campaigns in an effort to help advocates for climate solutions become more effective, paying attention to the moral foundations reflected in their messaging. Also, we should specify this note. While success can be a nebulous term, this report's objective is to shine a light on the faith community's ability to bring awareness and energy to social movements, bear witness to injustices, and help people along the way. Faith's role is not always to design solutions or advise, but often to demand that policymakers elicit effective, just, and equitable solutions that benefit all. So what ecoAmerica found. Americans have reached an emotional tipping point on many issues and are moving beyond frustration and fear into action. Public awareness and discourse have grown. People are organizing and publicly advocating for change or resisting the norms that contributed to each issue. And there's been action as a result. In addition, the involvement, or in some cases, direct leadership of people and communities of faith has led to significant progress toward the movement's goals. Each of these efforts, whether or not one agrees with their goals or objectives, is rooted in strongly held beliefs and profound lived experiences that motivate those involved to act. Ultimately, just as New Sanctuary and Black Lives Matter movements are progressing, so can the climate movement to bring about just, effective, and timely climate solutions. And just as people and communities of faith have been vital in creating awareness and action in these campaigns, so can they take action on climate change. The following are lessons derived from studying all three campaigns. Today we'll focus on the learnings, but the context, background, messaging, tactics, and much more by each campaign can be found in the full report. Let's jump in. In all three movements, long-term centralized planning offers a cohesive, well-aligned national strategy. Immediate decentralized action allows for agility, inclusivity, and co-ownership of the issue. Both are really needed to help a modern movement evolve rapidly. The national level empowers advocates with replicable, constructive actions for policy change, but then let's go. And this leads to our first finding. Think nationally, act locally. An example comes from Black Lives Matter, whose national leadership sets policy goals and offers replicable actions, such as the die-ins you might have seen. Advocates apply this to their community in a way that works for them. And Extinction Rebellion is doing something similar with great success. Partnerships and networks are key, particularly with investment in frontline communities. They allow movements to quickly leverage scale and boots on the ground. Public commitments help other Americans feel that it's safe to engage and join the movement. The learning here is go public in partnerships, make public commitments. The very visible commitments in the sanctuary movement are a shining example. Alaide is going to speak to this in a few minutes. And the We Are Still In commitments by cities and states that honor the Paris Agreement also align with this learning. So we all understand that climate crosses other issues. These campaigns reaffirm that when we connect a given issue to what Americans care about personally, we can broaden leadership to new folks who are not currently working on the issue. As we know, the disadvantaged are hurt first and worst. The next learning takes partnership to a deeper level, including new voices from multiple messengers. These voices can get everyday people to engage and even make participation a norm in the community. Collaborate for inclusion and reach is learning number 3. New Sanctuary accomplished this in their accompaniment through the court process, which involved people of faith acting as a trusted community member and a source of support through legal proceedings for those seeking refuge. We're looking forward to Alaide telling us more on this in a few minutes. Next, we're talking about how to be truly personally relevant. From past research, we know that when Americans, in particular, believe an issue is affecting their personal rights, they feel a moral imperative to act. In these campaigns, we see that once people see themselves or their loved ones in the issue, they're willing to take bold social risk. Many of you have been working on climate change for years, so you understand its relevance. But many Americans have not moved to this urgent moral imperative phase because they can't quite see how it's personally relevant. These movements have been able to achieve this and offer their audience a thorough explanation of personal impacts. Some ways they've done this is through voices of frontline communities who've been affected, would benefit from solutions, or maybe have had a conversion experience that provoked their support. The overall lesson is get personal, move past fear toward an emotional tipping point. In the Trump election campaign, some people of faith were activated. They were able to move past fear and invest in a candidate who represented a solution. In Black Lives Matter, people moved past the tipping point due to intolerable justices. And in New Sanctuary, congregations were so motivated that they were willing to host sanctuary and stand in defiance. The movements also found success by appealing to long-held values in their slogans they act as all-in or all-out statements. Think Black Lives Matter, keep families together, and make America great again. Repeating these statements help ingrain them as truth, especially because they reinforce a person's identity with that value. Therefore, ecoAmerica recommends that you make messages moral, ground in traditional values, repeat often. In Sanctuary, the Jewish tradition employed the statement, never again means never again, hearkening deep values of protecting against discrimination and violence. Alaide will share how both common language and values-driven language has helped her work in addressing systemic issues. And the Trump election campaign deeply understood the values of their conservative base and nailed their slogan, repeating often. On the climate front, we need an unassailable message, something you can't disagree with on its face. A Black Lives Matter, keep families together, or make America great of our own. Empowerment is key in moving people from understanding the moral imperative of action past that emotional tipping point. This part of empowerment entails equipping people with resources and tools to act, to get them over the hurdle of wanting to participate but not knowing how or feeling overwhelmed. Ask people to join you at the local level with an accessible ask, and we found that people want to join a successful movement. We know that with such little time to act on climate change, we need to pool our resources and act fast. For these reasons, we urge you to empower success, create and share a breadth of best practices and tools. In these movements, there's widespread circulation of resources, including getting started toolkits, social packages, guides, pamphlets, and training sessions on how to organize nonviolent protests. Black Lives Matter provides resources for starting your own local chapter. And in New Sanctuary, pew cards are used to inform congregants of their rights and what to do if ICE comes to your door. So we are all communicating about climate change, but are we doing this in a way that's connecting with others? What we saw in these campaigns is that they did something new with these channels. Campaigns are exploring new ways for people to collaborate with one another and inviting them to join the narrative by creating their own first-hand content. This lesson is become modern media savvy, right-size content, employ innovation, then let go. An objective look at the Trump election campaign tells us that the campaign knew exactly where to reach their audience. Did you know that 45% of adults watch Christian TV on a monthly basis? Evangelical media, which includes radio, were relentlessly on message during the campaign. So it was the right fit and the right medium. Black Lives Matter had vivid video recordings of police brutality that were effective in exposing and unmasking authority figures and paying witness to the cause. Content that exposed authority in all three campaigns sparked public outrage and propelled issues onto the national stage. Faith leaders have the unique ability to bear witness to social injustices that impact our world and particularly harm the most vulnerable among us. Involve the faith community from its leaders of faith traditions down to the congregants in climate action and advocacy. We've invited Alaide here today to share a story that illustrates the final lesson, have faith, involve the faith community more meaningfully, and the profound impact and influence the faith sector can have in these kinds of efforts. Before we dive in, I'll turn it over to Annie again to share a little about the Blessed Tomorrow program and introduce Alaide.
Great, thanks, Natalie. And again, thanks for everyone for joining us today. So I'm the director of our faith program, Blessed Tomorrow, and we are a coalition of faith institutions and faith leaders, heads of denominations, individuals within faith institutions who are working on environmental issues, well-known authors, academics, etc., who are working to visibly lead and try to advance climate action and advocacy as a matter of faith. And so think about where you live, the streets you drive, you walk, or bike past every day. I'm sure you can picture a temple, a church, a house of worship, or probably several. So just a reminder that people of faith are in every community, and faith leaders are shepherding those people every day through their joys, their struggles, and of course their lived experiences. And they are an important part of each community, an important partner to think about in advancing social justice, and that includes climate justice. So we at Blessed Tomorrow are working to engage and empower the faith sector to do just that. We have a wealth of resources. If you haven't been to our website, please visit us at blessedtomorrow.org. We provide guidance for people of all faiths to communicate with the public, their friends and family, congregations, others in their community, and most importantly, with policymakers about the moral imperative of climate solutions, and also things like reducing energy use, moving towards clean energy sources. And all of that is rooted in authentic faith language and faith perspectives. So again, visit our website. You can subscribe to our newsletter. You can follow us on social media to learn more and certainly to stay connected to the important work. We would really love to have you involved. Next slide. So at this point, I am excited, very excited to introduce our special guest today, again, Alaide Vilchis Ibarra. And again, she serves as the network organizer for the AMMPARO Program of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. She's also the executive director of the Oregon Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice. And she's a well-known leader in this space. We can see her here now on the screen. So I'm honored and excited to welcome her to the call. And Alaide, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe the two roles here that we see on the screen, and certainly I think the story of how people of faith in your work and the work of the ELCA have really made an important impact on the sanctuary movement. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, hi everybody. It's so great to be here, and thank you so much for taking the time to hear me out. As I'm talking a little bit more about the places where I work, you may see a poll coming up here asking you just how often have you engaged with the communities in a meaningful way. So, but let me tell you a little bit more about the ELCA and the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, also known as EMERGE. The ELCA, or Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, is one of the largest Protestant denominations in the United States. And has been doing work on, many Lutherans have been doing work on immigrant justice for many, many years. And I will talk a little bit about the experience around sanctuary today. And the organization that I lead, and I'm the executive director of, the Oregon Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, accompanies and equips communities of faith to do immigrant justice work. And what that looks like is oftentimes being in the relationships with communities throughout Oregon. You may be familiar with similar organizations to mine, known as the Sanctuary Organization in your community. Our organization is a statewide throughout the state of Oregon. So thank you so much for filling out that poll. That's just helpful information. And the next slide, please. I wanted to talk to you about a couple of our experiences, or my experiences working with the faith community on immigrant justice. So first, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the ELCA becoming the first sanctuary church body in North America, something that was in the news and you may have heard about before. And also wanted to tell you a bit more about a courthouse ruling in Oregon that had an effect on the immigrant communities here in Oregon, not being able to be arrested when they're in courthouses, and made courthouses safer for everybody, and how the faith community played an important role in that. First, just to say that for many of the communities that we work with and members, of the Lutheran Church, the work that we're doing and justice work is ways to live out their faith out in public, right? To come outside of their communities and see what's going on, and based in relationship and deep belief. And I think that's something that we've already spoken to. So faith communities are working on environmental issues, white supremacy and racism, immigration, environmental issues already as a matter of faith. And that's an important part of understanding how faith communities are engaging in this work and or experiences. And I just want to share a little bit with you about some of that experience. So next slide. Let me tell you a little bit more about the ELCA becoming the first sanctuary denomination. And next slide. So it's important to understand, and I want to acknowledge that work with immigrants for the ELCA has been happening for many years. And people have been organizing in informal, Lutherans have been organizing in informal networks for so many years before any of this timeline. And I'm unable, I don't have the space on this slide to be able to tell you just all of that amazing work, but I just want to acknowledge that all of that happened. And that there has been an effort since then, where I do talk about here in April 2016, for some of the Lutheran, more local and regional Lutheran spaces to name themselves sanctuary bodies starting in 2016. So we had our first sanctuary synod, what we call it, which is a specifically a regional body, kind of a regional space, kind of, if you're familiar with the Catholic Church, is like our archdiocese circle synods in the Lutheran context. And so we start seeing kind of some just communal movement and wanting to have a space for organizing around immigrant justice and have common language, right? The word sanctuary for people of faith is really meaningful. And I think that that's, in 2016, we're still seeing some of the formalizing of some of that throughout the church structures. And then in August 2016, something called the ELCA AMMPARO strategy passed, which is very specific work with from the Lutheran Church, saying the Lutheran Church commits itself to doing work with children and families that are fleeing for violence. This was something that was born out of seeing news of unaccompanied children and families leaving their home countries and coming to the US, starting actually in 2011, but really in 2014, coming to the US seeking protection. And we're still seeing some of those families and some of the impetus for that movement today. And so when the AMMPARO strategy passed, there were suddenly resources and common language. There was a staff person throughout in the Lutheran Church that's able to kind of organize and provide materials and speak commonly about why do Lutherans care about immigration broadly, and specifically about why Lutherans should be investing in people leaving their communities. There was also just an ability or a container finally to have through the Lutheran structure to have continuing engagement in new communities that may be interested in immigration or may have seen the news, maybe had not had a space to be able to act. And it feels, many of the communities feel like acting through their church body or through their faithful body is a way to engage that feels very natural and feels like a place where people want to spend some time, because they've already it's a meaningful part of their community already. And then there was also a lot of effort in providing some container for youth specific engagement. And there was a lot of work with high school and college communities to talk about what immigration was, and especially combating some of the immigration messaging that was already that was happening because of the election. And so this strategy passed in the summer of 2016, and in November of 2016, Trump got elected. The president got elected, and one of their big platforms was attacking immigrant communities. And so without really meaning to, when this really meaningful thing happened in immigrant justice and the immigrant justice work, there was already a container that existed, even though at that time we would not have known that, right? Like what could have happened months from now. Because there was a container, it was really a space for us to be able to kind of answer that call and what that would mean after the election, which since the election, we know that the communities that AMMPARO committed to accompanying have been really affected by some of the policies that have happened since. And finally, all of that work and all of that like continued growth of engagement led to this vote in August of 2019, just this year, for the ELCA to become the first sanctuary church body. And there was a public action during the gathering of all of the national churches that took that vote, and the national representatives of communities all over the United States that are part of the ELCA, asking for families not to be in detention, which is something that Lutherans have been working on for many, many years, like in the 90s and before then, but it was an important thing to be public about that. And that means more resources, right? So continued resources, continue to create and co-create common language around this, and then continued engagement of new communities that are oftentimes being compelled to action by some of the things that they're seeing either in their own communities and through their relationships, or compelled to action because of something that they see in the news or some policy change. And so what the Sanctuary Church Body Declaration really meant, and I'll go to the next slide, one of the public pieces of that was a lot of media attention on the ELCA, right? So this is a Washington Post article about an entire Lutheran denomination declaring itself a sanctuary church body. And what that really means is just an awareness, kind of an awareness that people of faith are really engaged in this work, and in a world in which oftentimes people of faith are maybe kind of looking over anti-immigrant rhetoric. It's really saying, no, people of faith and Lutherans are saying that they want to declare themselves a sanctuary church body and engage with sanctuary communities throughout the country, but also engage on immigrant justice issues more broadly. And the declaration was truly an outward, a public statement about where the ELCA is around immigration. The ELCA is very politically all over the place, right? There isn't like a political it's a diverse community, like politically, and their ability or like the meaning of saying no, this is really a matter of faith. Working with immigrant communities is a matter of faith. Is important, and it requires a lot of education. It doesn't mean that every single community where you go, they're gonna, that they're gonna be necessarily doing work in immigrant justice. But it creates a space and a container to be able to have common language and to continue to educate people. So I think I'm gonna go to the next slide. And then, so I think that some of the things that we learned from some of that work is just that we have newly engaged communities through creating these containers of common language and common resources. We also, it was important, right? This work is centered in values, and I think the research that ecoAmerica did speaks to that, to centering some of the conversation in values. And finally, of creating capacity to do justice work, right? As we're having and creating relationships and bringing more people into those structures, it allows us to have more capacity to do that work and look beyond, right, like what it means or to do immigrant justice, but also look at the intersectionalities between all of our work, including environmental issues as well. So it's important to create that relationship in common language. And I wanted to tell you with in a few minutes just some of the work that we have done here in Oregon as the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, to create a safer space for immigrant communities in courthouses. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And I just wanted to tell you that some of our work to get outside of courthouses, it's not, and the work that eMERGE does is not absent all of the work that the Lutherans have done. We are actually connected to the Lutheran structures and denominations through the faith communities that we are in relationship with. And in Oregon, we're in relationship with about 150 different faith communities, all throughout Oregon, including in some rural communities and other communities that are engaging in immigrant justice as eMERGE. And we're also connected to that national structure that exists through the different faith communities. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about one of our campaigns that we held to create to make sure that the Supreme Court Justice, the Oregon Supreme Court Justice, issued an emergency ruling that declared that ICE could not arrest people in courthouses without a warrant. And this was this campaign came about from our relationships. We started to realize, and community members and people that we're in relationship with came up to us and said that their family members and members in their congregation were being arrested as they were going to courthouses and in courthouses. And during one of the vigils here in Oregon, our emerged community and leaders were witnesses to an arrest of a U.S. citizen, or an attempted arrest of a U.S. citizen by ICE, actually somebody who worked at a courthouse and was being racially profiled. And ICE arrested them, and we just happened to be there as Emerge holding a vigil outside. And so some of our leaders were witness to that. And this is when we started to realize that we were seeing over and over that ICE was arresting people and targeting people at courthouses. So we worked together with legal partners and members and community partners to come up with solutions together. And the legal community was already working on having the Supreme Chief Court Justice issue a ruling saying that really prevented their work of justice in Oregon from happening if people are afraid to come into courthouses. And so through that partnership, for a while, they were doing that work and we knew about it, but they had said that it wasn't helpful for faith communities or community members to step in and be public about it. So though we knew that work was happening, we weren't doing much. But because we already have that relationship and a space where we were tracking what was happening, when it was time, when the legal community felt like it was appropriate and necessary for community members to act, we asked our members, emerged communities to come together and ask the Supreme Court Chief Justice to issue this ruling to prevent ICE from arresting people in courthouses without a warrant. And the that you see on the left, it's actually a small campaign that we held of people of faith all throughout that made vigils all throughout the state of Oregon in their local courthouses, saying that they wanted this issue ruling. And so you see different courthouses throughout Oregon and people taking their pictures. And then we sent that to Chief Martha Walters, and also we were able to send that to the Uniform Trials Court Rule Committee, a handful, which is a committee of lawyers and judges that come together and can also issue a rule and recommendations to the Chief Justice. And we as Emerge send a letter as an organization, but also coordinated a letter from 150 different faith leaders asking Chief Justice to please pass this ruling. And we were able to gather the signatures in just 2 days because people already were tracking what was happening in New. And so finally, so next slide, please. Thank you for the poll. And here's what we learned from some of this, right? We need to create, as faith communities, containers, and faith communities can be good spaces to create common language around what's happening. And also, faith communities have the capacity to engage beyond the choir. So many of our communities are very diverse politically but are already well-versed in having conversations that may be difficult and in being able to do that. And so as long as we equip community members and leaders to have those conversations can actually happen and be successful and lead to transformation and change in policies. So that's something that we've really learned. Also, our faith community, right, the Uniform Trial Court Rule and a rule by the Supreme Court Justice of Oregon is not something that is simple to understand necessarily. It's not a law, right? It's a ruling, but our communities are able to grasp really complex issues and work on it and activate other members on it when they understand it and understand the human impact of that. And then just that faith communities can help frame the conversation for the world we would want to see. So oftentimes our campaigns and the way that we speak about immigration, both in the sanctuary example and in the courthouse example, is really speaking from the place of the world we want to see, not the thing we're fighting against, which is a different framing and understanding of like, here, we invite you to join us in this amazing world in which a community member wouldn't be afraid to do something as simple as go get a marriage license at a courthouse, right? And so come join us. We invite you to that, and that's a really important framing for people, and something that has been really continues to be enforced by different research that's happening in Oregon. One of our coalition's member, their research where it talks about that, like that value language, and also that people that are the messengers are already part of the community are actually really important and critical because you already trust them and know them. And so that's an important way in which faith communities have really stepped up in the immigrant justice work. I'll send it back to Annie. I know that she for any questions. Thank you so much for having me.
Great, thanks, Alaide. And I actually think Natalie's going to help facilitate our Q&A as she can see all of the great questions that are coming through. So Natalie, you want to get us started?
Thank you. And thank you, Alaide, for sharing your story and experiences. Your achievements, particularly with rural communities, always draws inspiration on how we can do the same on the climate front and achieve mutual benefits together. But we'll now begin our question and answer period with some questions that were chatted to us during the presentation. So thank you to all who've been sending in some really great questions here. The first question is, I'm not from a faith community and don't yet have experience engaging them on climate. I have some hesitation in beginning to build a relationship. From your experience, how can I do this while keeping the conversation on one topic? I think Alaide will send this one your way, if that's all right.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. And I think for us, or something that I maybe didn't know before I started working in the faith community space, was that actually those conversations are already happening in many of the congregations and spaces with communities of faith. And they're already deeply important, right? Care for creation is already something that we have language for, care for creation. And so I think reaching out and finding out and having just one-on-one relationship conversations with some of those maybe members of faith communities or faith leaders that you are seeing show up in other spaces, but maybe have never engaged them as a person of faith, just as a person in the world, and just begin from that relationship building. I think there is a lot of, I think especially in Oregon, but I think in general spaces, there's a lot of hesitation and maybe bad experiences working with faith communities, which I completely acknowledge. And so building relationship and knowing who your allies is within that space, and then saying, you know, what are the two other people that you're talking to about environmental issues that really deeply care about there? Are there other faith leaders? Are there other important people in your congregation? And starting to build relationship in that way, it's just a really important way to start engaging in that conversation and to get a sense of what faith communities conversations are having. I know that Lutheran churches have a policy person that works on environmental issues, but also throughout congregations, there is specific committees or spaces where there's already conversations around environmental issues happening. So plugging in there.
Yeah, and this is Annie. I just wanted to share a little more on just what Alaide was alluding to here. So we know that the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, as she mentioned, is leading on creation care. They actually have staff and leadership currently in Madrid, Spain, with a group of folks from the UN talking about climate change specifically as an important way for people of faith to lead in making sure that we're caring for creation. And again, all rooted in their faith values, but they're surrounded by academics and scientists and government officials and people from all other sectors who are also working on this issue. So they're allies in this work, and they're there. They've flown to Madrid, Spain to do this work. And then it's not just the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I mean, if you go to blessedtomorrow.org, for example, you'll see a list of the partners that we're working with. And we're working with a broad swath of different faith traditions. So, we're working with the Episcopal Church, with the Islamic Society of North America, with the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, with the Presbyterian Church, historically Black churches like the AME and AME Zion traditions, and many others. So I think sometimes in our community, in our conversations, we think there is a narrative out there that people of faith maybe don't care about this issue, or even maybe opposed to this issue. And while that certainly may be the case at times, there are so many people of faith who deeply believe, very deeply, that we are called to care for God's creation, and that includes addressing climate change. So it's just important, and I think all of the steps that Natalie outlined here can be applied to anyone, whether or not you are working with the faith community. But I just want to reiterate that the faith sector can be a helpful ally in this work. We're already doing this work. Again, check us out on Blessed Tomorrow. You can see some of the great stuff that's going on. And so we should be someone that you're thinking about engaging as you do your work. You know, it's a way to leverage all of our work, our resources, our reach, all rooted in similar values, right? We want to take care of people. We want to ensure a safe and healthy future for our families. These are all common values. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you both. We have one quick question from Megan. She said, apologies if I missed the answer to this, but can you explain the origin of Lutherans' interest in immigration issues?
The origin of Lutherans, was that the question?
Yes, correct. Oh, with the origin of their interest in immigration issues.
Yeah, the origin of Lutherans interested in immigration issues. Thank you for the question. So Lutherans actually have been engaged in that work for a long time. Lutherans are in the United States because they're an immigrant community. And many Lutherans actually after World War II fled and came to the United States. And so one of the refugee resettlement agencies is actually Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, first resettling Lutherans in the U.S. and then after that, just resettling refugees in general to the United States. So there's a long tradition. This is just the Lutheran communities, but there is actually a long tradition of many other faith communities as well doing immigration work. And resettling refugees and working on immigration issues. And I think some of the things that I was illustrating with some of the ways in which the whole church body is structured, both national, regional, and state, congregation level, community levels, are able to engage in like coming up and continuing to organize together and coordinate together around the issue.
Thank you. We have another question from Jean. Jean asks, what would be some examples of common language that Alaide mentions?
So some of the common language that we use was even just saying the AMMPARO strategy for children and families. People are fleeing. That was people are fleeing their communities. They're looking for safety. And they're coming to the United States. Just saying that people fleeing, coming for safety to the United States is something that the AMMPARO strategy in common language, we were able to really uphold, and it also educates people, right? People are fleeing, they're leaving. As there was a narrative that people are just leaving their communities and immigrants, we were able to talk and say, fleeing is different, and also people are seeking safety. So that's one example in which, for example, the AMMPARO strategy I talked about was able to create that common, like, two different things, like people fleeing, seeking protection. The US is where they're coming, right? And then having the conversation. For the courthouses, for example, for the courthouses campaign, we often use the term circle of protection. The circle of protection, and we ask people to join the circle of protection in the community, and say courthouses should be a place that is in protection, that is protected, and that people feel safe to go to it, because there's so many things that people do in courthouses that would really prevent justice from happening. Like Oregon cannot, and this cannot be, people cannot be fearful of going to a courthouse to get a marriage license. And so we use the common language circle of protection and ask actually the Supreme Court Justice to join the circle of protection with us alongside people of faith to make courthouses safe for everybody. And I don't know if I mentioned that the ruling did happen, and it just last month, Oregon is the third state to have that ruling, and the state that has the most expansive version of that rule, thanks to all of the work that we all did together with legal experts and other communities. also important. We're not isolated, working together and supporting the work that's happening.
Thank you. We also have one final question I'll squeeze in here. Climate change has unfortunately been politicized highly. How does one work with the official faith leaders in a congregation or local faith community to get beyond that fear of breaking up a community by bringing up climate change issues, including climate justice?
Natalie, I can take this, and then if Alaide has something from her work in the immigration movement that might be relevant, please feel free to add here. But this is just what we at Blessed Tomorrow are trying to help address. So yes, we certainly know that faith leaders, clergy in particular, do sometimes have concerns about talking about politically difficult issues, or really sensitive issues generally, and want to feel confident, want to feel supported in being able to communicate this and to tie it back to those theological grounding, the scriptures, being able to really reference this from their faith tradition. And so we've been working with our partners to develop all kinds of tools and resources to try to get at this. And one of the things that I think is most helpful, and it can be helpful for a person of faith who wants to talk to others, people of faith, or for someone outside of the faith sector who wants to speak to people of faith, and that is our tool called Let's Talk Faith and Climate. You can find it on our website. It's a guide and a toolkit, and there's a webinar that accompanies it that talks through how you can build a message rooted in the values of the people you're speaking to, because that's what's really important here. And I think Alaide did actually talk about this earlier, is making sure that this is something that's rooted in existing values that are held by the vast majority of people that you're working with. It doesn't have to be a political issue. If we look at a lot of different scripture texts, it tells us right there in the scripture that we are called to care for God's creation. And when we can point to the theological grounding versus the political talking points, we can get that, we can reach people and get them involved and engaged through a different channel. And I think that's really important to think about. So again, it's called Let's Talk Faith and Climate. You can find it on our website. We're also conducting a new program that we're piloting with some of our partners, and it's going to be more formally launched next year. And it's called our Blessed Tomorrow Ambassador Program. And it's actually a almost 4-hour training for clergy and lay leaders to learn how to talk about this issue rooted in their faith tradition, how to develop things like sermons, things like other community presentations from their own unique voice. And so that's something that, again, we're trying to help bridge the issue that this questioner was asking. So thank you so much for asking that question. It's a very real thing. Alaide, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think that for us, it has been really important to work, I think, and for our partners, it's been really important to work through community organizations that are specifically equipped to do faith work as well, has been really helpful in that sense, and being able to know that there's organizations or containers or spaces where faith communities are already talking about that, and there's leaders within that work, and also to just talk about the challenges of that. I think oftentimes in this work, because of the politicization of environmental climate change and also of immigration issues, there is this tendency to ignore the fact that it has been politicized. So that is a challenge for our faith leaders or our faith community when they're talking. And so just naming it together and saying, how can I help you to do one, like, how can I do just one little thing? Like, what does one little movement into action look like? Don't think about, tomorrow you're gonna get arrested on this issue, but it's like, what does it look like to support, one brave action, maybe bringing it up in a way or having a conversation about it. And I think just being forthright and having a conversation about that even being an issue, and then saying, how can I support you to take one small step, not one big, gigantic piece, has been a really important way in which we have brought so many communities together around immigration in the midst of constant polarization, and also in the midst of constant changes and the decimation of many of the immigration systems.
Wonderful, thank you. That is all the time we had for questions. Thank you again for participating in today's webinar, and thank you so much to Alaide for her time and for all the great work she's doing. We highly encourage you all to download the full report at ecoamerica.org/research. Also, as a reminder, a recording of the webinar will be sent to all registrants and attendees. We'll also be posting the recording on our website, which you can share with others who couldn't join us today. There's a number of opportunities to continue engaging with guidance for climate advocacy. Please engage with us on Twitter using the hashtag #FaithFuelsMovements for this report and at ecoAmerica. And please subscribe to our newsletter to receive other research in your inbox and check out our upcoming American Climate Leadership, which we're very excited about. Early bird prices are still available, and you can find the links to both of those in the chat box. Thank you again for listening in today, and feel free to contact any of us with any further questions or comments about what we discussed today. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.